Hi, I'm Hugh McConaughey, dairy nutritionist for Zinpro Corporation, and today I'm going to answer the question, where do we prioritise the feeding of Zinpro performance minerals in situations where there are constraints on expenditure on the dairy? But before I answer that question, I first want us to consider the value of feeding Zinpro performance minerals before considering the cost. So we know that if we feed Zinpro performance minerals throughout lactation and during the dry period, which is our recommendation, then we see an increase in milk production, we see improvements in transition cow performance, we see healthier claws and less lameness, and we see improvements in reproduction and increases in feed efficiency. These are all things which will generate additional income for the dairy and improve financial performance. Now let's consider the cost of feeding a Vela Dairy 6 to a dairy cow as a percentage of its total feed costs. So we know that a kilogram of total mixed ration costs around about 15 rubles per kilogram of dry matter. So to feed a cow consuming 23 kilograms of dry matter would cost us somewhere in the region of 345 rubles. This means that the cost of feeding a Vela Dairy 6 and achieving all those benefits listed below would only be about 3.3% of the total feed costs. Now, in order to answer the question of where we should focus the feeding of Zinpro performance minerals in these situations where cost is an issue, then we need to look at the requirements of trace minerals during the production cycle. And as you can see from these three charts, the pattern of requirements is very similar for manganese, copper and zinc. The highest demand is during the dry period and early lactation for each of the three minerals. And this then gives us a good guide on where we should be focusing supplementation. So my recommendation would be that first of all, we focus on dry group 1 and 2 and the fresh cows. For me, the fresh cows are those cows in the first 3 weeks of lactation. I think it's very important that we focus as well on dry group 1 as well as dry group 2, because within dry group 1 we have the fetus growing quickly inside the cow, and this increases the demand for trace minerals. The next group to prioritize, of course, will be the high production. These cows are rapidly increasing in milk, and we know that the demand for trace minerals, especially zinc, is driven by the level of milk production. And then finally would be the pregnant cows in late lactation. So let's look at where we would focus the feeding of Avela chromium separately to the trace minerals. So we know in order to get the best response from feeding chromium, it needs to be fed to the transition cows. These are the cows 3 weeks pre and 3 weeks post calving. But in order to get the maximum benefit, we also need to feed the high production cows. So my recommendation would be transition cows and high production cows. And we also need to consider in summer, especially if the cows are at increased risk of heat stress, then these cows should also be receiving Avela chromium, and we will see a healthy return on investment from including it in the rations of these cows. So I hope this short webinar has answered your questions. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.